The earth groaned like a dying beast. Alara felt the tremor before she heard it, a subtle vibration traveling through the soles of her worn boots and up into her bones. 7 years in the silver mines of Shadowmere had taught her to read the language of stone, to understand when the mountain was merely settling and when it was about to swallow men whole. This was the latter. She dropped her inspection lantern and screamed the only word that mattered. "Run!" The 5 slaves working the adjacent tunnel needed no second warning. They had all seen what happened when the mountain decided to take back its stolen treasures. Collapses killed more workers than the silver poisoning, more than the beatings, more than the despair that drove some to simply stop eating. The mountain was hungry, and it fed often. Alara grabbed the arm of the nearest worker, a young Omega named Petra, who had only been in the mines for 8 months and still flinched at shadows. The girl was frozen, her eyes wide and white in the lantern light as the ceiling began to crack above them. There was no time for gentle encouragement. Alara yanked Petra forward with enough force to nearly dislocate her shoulder, propelling her toward the side passage that most workers avoided because of the bad air and unstable footing. But bad air was better than burial, and unstable footing was preferable to becoming part of the mountain forever. The main tunnel collapsed behind them with a roar that shook dust from every surface and filled the air with choking particles of rock and silver ore. Alara kept moving, one hand on the wall to guide her, the other still gripping Petra's wrist. Behind her, she could hear the others following, their breathing harsh and panicked in the darkness. Her father had been a miner before he was a father, before he was a husband, before he was a corpse in the dirt of a destroyed pack. He had taught her to read stone the way other fathers taught their children to read books. He had shown her the hairline fractures that preceded major breaks, the way water seepage indicated structural weakness, the subtle shifts in air pressure that warned of impending disaster. Those lessons had kept her alive for 7 years when so many others had died. The side passage narrowed until they were forced to move single file, their shoulders scraping against rough stone walls. Alara counted heads as they passed a junction where a weak shaft of light filtered down from a ventilation hole far above. 5 workers, all accounted for. Petra, still trembling. Old Samuel, who had been mining longer than Alara had been alive. The twins from the Northern Territory, whose pack had been destroyed 2 winters ago. And young Marcus, only 14, who reminded Alara so much of her brother that looking at him sometimes made her chest ache with phantom pain. Not her brother. Her brother was dead, had been dead for nearly 7 years, killed by lung sickness within months of their capture. She had not even been allowed to bury him. The passage opened into a larger chamber where the air was cleaner and the ceiling showed no signs of imminent collapse. Alara finally allowed herself to stop, bending over with her hands on her knees as she fought to slow her racing heart. Samuel approached her, his weathered face creased with something that might have been gratitude or might have been resignation. After enough years in the mines, those 2 expressions became difficult to distinguish. "You saved us, girl. Again." Alara straightened, pushing her white blonde hair back under the gray scarf that kept it hidden from view. Her hair was distinctive, too memorable, and slaves who drew attention rarely lived long. She had learned early to make herself invisible, to blend into the background of misery that defined daily life in Shadowmere's silver mines. The mountain gave warning. I just listened. Others would have run alone, faster that way, safer. Alara thought of her father, standing between the Shadowmere warriors and the children of Silverbrook Pack, thought of her mother, her small hands raised in futile defense as the wolves tore through their home, thought of the price of selfishness and the cost of courage, and how both seemed to lead to the same grave in the end. Get them back to the main shaft. The guards will be checking the damage. Make sure everyone has a story that does not mention this passage. Samuel nodded and began herding the others toward the safer routes that would return them to sanctioned areas. Alara stayed behind, needing a moment alone to gather herself, to push down the memories that the adrenaline had stirred loose from their carefully maintained prison. 7 years. She had survived 7 years in this place by following simple rules. Stay invisible, stay useful, stay alive. Do not form attachments that would make loss unbearable. Do not hope for rescue that would never come. Do not remember the life that had been stolen, the family that had been murdered, the future that had been erased. Most days the rules worked. Most days she could move through her duties like a ghost, noticed by no one, mourned by no one if she were to disappear. But some days, like today, the past broke through her defenses and reminded her that she had not always been this empty thing, this hollow creature that wore her face and moved through the world on borrowed time. She had been 15 when Shadowmere came for Silverbrook Pack. The memory surfaced unbidden, as vivid as if it were happening now rather than 7 years ago. The smell of smoke and blood, the screams of the dying. Her father's voice, calm even as warriors 3 times his size surrounded their small home. "Alara, take your brother. The back passage. Run and do not look back." She had grabbed Damon's hand. Her 8-year-old brother, who still believed that big sisters could fix anything, could fight off monsters, could make the bad things go away. They had almost made it to the tree line when the Shadowmere warrior caught them. Alara remembered his face with perfect clarity even now, the cruel twist of his mouth, the fresh scar on his cheek, curved like a crescent moon, still red and angry from whatever recent battle had given it to him, the casual ease with which he had backhanded her to the ground and seized Damon by the arm. "Got 2 runners here, young ones. The girl might be worth something when she is older. The boy looks weak, probably will not survive the mines." Alara had screamed and fought and begged, but she was 15 and small for her age, and the warrior had simply laughed at her attempts to reach her brother. They had been dragged in opposite directions, Damon's terrified cries growing fainter until they disappeared entirely beneath the greater symphony of destruction that was consuming her pack. 6 months later, she had learned that Damon died of lung sickness. The bad air in the deep mines was especially hard on children, and 8-year-old bodies were not built to survive the conditions that slowly killed even the strongest adults. She had not cried when she heard the news. She had simply added his death to the ledger of losses that defined her existence and continued surviving, because that was all she knew how to do anymore. Survive, endure, wait for the end that would eventually come, whether through accident or illness or simply giving up. 7 years of waiting, and the end had not yet arrived. Alara shook off the memories and checked her lantern. The oil was still good for another few hours, and she had duties to complete before the night shift ended. Inspection of the deep tunnels was a task given only to the most trusted slaves, a dubious honor that came with both increased responsibility and increased danger. The deep tunnels were older, less stable, and far from any help if something went wrong. Tonight, her assigned route took her past the sealed section. Everyone knew about the sealed section. 3 years ago, a massive collapse had killed 5 workers and rendered an entire network of tunnels too unstable for safe operation. The Shadowmere guards had barricaded the entrance and posted warnings that even the most desperate slaves respected. The mountain had claimed that territory, and anyone foolish enough to challenge its ownership would join the 5 who had already paid the price. Alara had passed the barricade hundreds of times without incident. The wooden boards were old and rotting, the warning signs faded to near illegibility, but the message remained clear enough. Death lay beyond, and death was patient enough to wait for the curious. She was nearly past when she heard it, a sound so faint that at first she thought she had imagined it. A whimper, pained and desperate, drifting from somewhere behind the barricade like a ghost seeking release from eternal torment. Alara stopped walking. The sound came again, weaker this time, and something in its quality made her blood run cold. This was not the settling of stone or the echo of distant activity. This was a living creature in agony, calling out for help that would never come. Logic said to keep walking. The sealed section was unstable and dangerous, and the guards would not look kindly on a slave who ignored their explicit warnings. Getting involved in things that were not her business was a good way to end up dead, and Alara had not survived 7 years by taking unnecessary risks. But she thought of her father. Standing his ground when running would have been so much easier. Thought of her mother, whose last act had been to shield the pack's children with her own body. Thought of the legacy they had left her, the impossible standard of courage that she had spent 7 years failing to meet. The sound came a third time, barely audible now, and Alara made her choice. The barricade was even more rotten than she had expected. The wooden boards came away with minimal effort, the nails rusted to the point of crumbling at her touch. She slipped through the gap and into the forbidden darkness beyond, her lantern held high to illuminate the treacherous path ahead. The tunnel was in terrible condition. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and the ceiling sagged in places that made her instinctively duck. Water dripped from somewhere above, creating puddles that reflected her lantern light in wavering patterns. The air smelled of decay and abandonment, of spaces that had been left to rot without maintenance or care. She followed the sounds deeper into the sealed section, past collapsed side passages and around corners that her miner's instincts screamed at her to avoid. Every step felt like tempting fate, like daring the mountain to finish what it had started 3 years ago. Then she found the room. It had once been an interrogation chamber, the kind of place where guards had extracted information from particularly stubborn slaves through methods that left permanent scars. Iron rings were set into the walls at various heights, their surfaces stained with the memory of old blood. The floor bore similar stains, dark patterns that no amount of time could fully erase. But it was not the room's history that made Alara freeze in the doorway. It was what the room currently contained. The wolf was the largest she had ever seen, easily 4 feet tall at the shoulder, even lying down. His fur should have been pure white, pristine and beautiful, but it was instead matted with blood and burned black where the silver chains touched his skin. And there were so many chains. They wrapped around his entire body from neck to tail, paws to torso, layer upon layer of industrial-grade silver meant to hold the strongest of shifters. Smoke rose from every point of contact between metal and flesh. The smell of burning hair and meat filled the chamber, making Alara's eyes water and her stomach clench with nausea. This wolf had been here for days, possibly longer, left to die slowly in the dark while the silver ate away at his body. But it was the runes carved into the chains that made her blood run truly cold. Alara had been raised on her grandmother's stories, tales of the old magics that most packs had abandoned centuries ago as too dangerous, too unpredictable, too cruel even for prisoners of war. She recognized the symbols on these chains, binding runes designed to prevent shifting and drain life force, dark magic that the Council of Alphas had explicitly outlawed. Someone had not just chained this wolf with silver. They had ensured he could not escape, could not shift to accelerate healing, could not do anything but suffer until death finally granted mercy. The wolf's eyes cracked open at the intrusion of her lantern light. Ice blue irises, pale and striking, glowing even in the dimness with an inner fire that days of torture had failed to extinguish. He looked at her with pain and desperation, and a hope so naked that Alara felt her heart crack in her chest. She should leave. She should run back to the main tunnels and forget she had ever seen this place. This was clearly a prisoner, someone important enough to warrant this level of extreme security and deliberate cruelty. Helping him would be treason against Shadowmere, would earn her a death so brutal it would make 7 years of slavery look like a pleasant dream. The wolf made a sound between a whimper and a whine, his eyes never leaving her face. In them she saw intelligence, awareness, the unmistakable presence of a shifter trapped in his animal form by magic and pain. She saw herself reflected back. Another prisoner, another victim, another soul that had been deemed worthless by those with power. Alara set down her lantern and approached slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I am going to help you. I do not know if you can understand me, but I am going to get these chains off. Just hold on. The wolf's eyes tracked her movement as she knelt beside him, her hands hovering over the first layer of silver links. Up close, she could see the full extent of the damage. His fur was burned away in patches, revealing raw flesh beneath. His ribs were visible through his sides, evidence of days without food or water. His breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale a visible struggle against the weight of the chains and the agony of the silver. He was dying, slowly, painfully, inevitably dying, and he knew it. Alara took a deep breath and wrapped her hands around the first chain. The silver tingled against her palms, but did not burn. This was the secret she had kept hidden since childhood, the gift her grandmother had called a blessing from the moon goddess, and her parents had called a curse that must never be revealed. Silver resistance, the ability to touch the metal that was poison to wolfkind without suffering immediate damage. It was rare, perhaps 1 in 5,000 wolves with varying degrees of tolerance. Alara's resistance was at the highest level her grandmother had ever seen. She could handle silver for 10 to 15 minutes before the burning began, and she healed from silver exposure faster than normal wolves recovered from minor injuries. In the mines, this secret could have made her life easier. She could have worked the most dangerous areas without protection, could have earned favor with the guards by handling silver ore that other slaves could only touch with heavy gloves. But her parents had been clear about the danger of such exposure. If they know what you can do, they will use you until there is nothing left. They will work you until the constant contact kills you, gift or no gift. Keep it hidden, Alara. Promise us. She had promised. And for 7 years, she had kept that promise, pretending to suffer the same burns as everyone else, wearing gloves she did not need, hiding a power that could have been her greatest asset because the risk of revelation was too high. Now, in this forgotten chamber with a dying wolf before her, she finally had a reason to break her silence. The chains were thick and heavy, industrial-grade silver meant to hold shifters far stronger than any Omega. Alara could not break them with strength alone, but she knew where the tools were kept. She ran back through the unstable tunnels to the supply cache near the main passage, grabbing bolt cutters, a hacksaw, and a pry bar. The tools were heavy and awkward, designed for hands larger than hers, but desperation gave her strength she did not normally possess. She worked for 40 minutes, her hands cramping and bleeding from the effort. Sweat dripped into her eyes as she cut and pried and broke chain after chain. The binding runes complicated everything, their dark magic pulling the remaining chains tighter each time she removed one, as if the spell was fighting to maintain its hold. But Alara was stubborn. 7 years of survival had taught her persistence, had honed her ability to continue long after hope should have faded. She refused to quit. This wolf had suffered enough. He deserved freedom, deserved the chance to heal, deserved better than dying alone in the dark where no one would ever know his fate. She talked to him while she worked, a constant stream of reassurance and encouragement that she was not sure he could understand, but could not bring herself to stop. The sound of her own voice grounded her, reminded her that she was still human, despite 7 years of being treated as something less. "Hold on. I am almost through this section. Just a little more. Do not give up now. I have got you. I have got you." When the last chain finally fell away with a metallic clatter that echoed through the chamber, the wolf took his first full breath in what must have been days. His whole body shuddered with the inhale, his chest expanding properly for the first time since she had found him. His eyes opened wider, and he looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Recognition, gratitude, and something else, something deeper that she did not have time to analyze. Alara began gathering the chains, trying to hide the evidence of what she had done. The guards checked the mines every 2 hours, and if they found her here with a freed prisoner, her death would be inevitable and agonizing. The wolf needed to leave, needed to escape Shadowmere territory before anyone realized he was gone, and she needed to return to her quarters and pretend this night had never happened. "You need to go. Get up. Run. Get as far from here as you can before they realize you are gone." The wolf struggled to his feet, his legs shaking badly, his burned skin still smoking in places where the silver had done the most damage. He was weak, probably too weak to make it far. But she could not help with that, could not risk being caught, could not throw away 7 years of careful survival for a stranger, no matter how much her heart screamed at her to do exactly that. She turned to leave and froze when she heard his voice. It was rough and deep and absolutely human despite coming from a wolf's throat. A single word that stopped her in her tracks. "Wait." Alara spun back around and found herself facing not a wolf, but a man. He stood where the wolf had been, naked and covered in silver burns and dried blood, tall enough that he had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. His hair was platinum blonde, hanging to his shoulders in tangled waves that somehow still looked regal despite days of torture and neglect. His face was all sharp angles and strong bones, with a jaw that could cut glass and a mouth twisted with pain. A scar ran from his right temple down to his jaw, old and faded, speaking of battles survived and enemies defeated. His body was pure muscle, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, though the definition was muted by malnutrition and injury. He was clearly weakened, his legs barely supporting his weight, but there was power in him still, the kind of power that did not fade even when the body was broken. But it was his eyes that made Alara's heart stop, ice blue, pale and piercing, looking at her with an intensity that made her want to both run and stay. She knew those eyes. She had seen them described in terrified whispers among the guards, had heard stories of the wolf who possessed them, the king who had waged war against Shadowmere for 5 long years. She had just freed Kale, the Alpha King of Frostholm Pack, the most powerful alpha within 500 miles, the enemy of everything Shadowmere represented. Kale took a shaking step toward her, his hand reaching out as if he wanted to touch her, but was giving her the choice to move away. "You freed me. You touched Silver to save my life. You risked everything for a stranger." Alara backed up until her shoulders hit the wall, her mind racing with the implications of what she had done. The Shadowmere guards had been whispering for days about a diplomatic triumph. Their alpha had captured the enemy king during supposed peace negotiations, had violated the sacred tradition of the white flag to take the most valuable prisoner imaginable, and she had just cut him loose. "You need to go. Right now. The guards check the deep mines every 2 hours. If they find you here, if they know I helped you, they will kill everyone in the slave quarters. Every Omega, every child, everyone. You need to leave before anyone realizes you are gone." Kale shook his head slowly, his ice-blue eyes never leaving her face. "I am not leaving without you. You are coming with me." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. She had spent 7 years as property, 7 years being owned and controlled and treated like an object instead of a person. She had dreamed of freedom, of making her own choices, of belonging to no one but herself. "I am not anyone's to take. I saved your life because it was the right thing to do. That does not mean I belong to you now." Something flickered in Kyle's eyes, an emotion she could not quite read, through the haze of pain and exhaustion. "I did not mean it like that. I meant that if you stay here after what you have done, they will discover your involvement eventually. They will torture you for information. They will make an example of you. Coming with me is not about belonging to anyone. It is about survival." He swayed on his feet, his legs finally giving out, and Alara moved without thinking. She caught him before he could hit the ground, her arms wrapping around his waist as she tried to support his much larger weight. He was burning up with fever, his skin hot to the touch where it was not covered in silver burns. "You are going to die if you do not get help. Can you walk? Can you make it to the surface?" Kale's arm came around her shoulders, using her as a crutch as he tried to stand. "I can walk, but we need to move quickly. My territory is 3 days north. If we can make it to the border, my wolves will sense me and come running. I cannot just leave. The other slaves, they will punish everyone looking for who helped you. I have friends here, people who depend on me." "Then warn them. Tell them to run, to scatter, to get as far from this place as possible before dawn. But you cannot stay, and I cannot leave you behind, not after what you did for me." Alara thought of Helena, the old Omega who had taught her to read and write using scratches in the dirt, who had kept her sane during the darkest years of her captivity. Thought of young Marcus, only 14, who still believed he might see his parents again someday. Thought of the 20 other slaves who had become her family in the absence of blood relatives. If she left with Kael, if the guards discovered what she had done, those wolves would suffer for her choices. But looking at Kael, seeing the determination in his eyes despite his weakness, feeling the way his hand trembled where it gripped her shoulder, she realized she could not let him die either. He was important, not just to himself, but to thousands of wolves who lived in his territory. His death would mean the continuation of Shadowmere's cruelty, the perpetuation of the slave trade that had stolen her life and so many others. 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes to warn my friends, please. Cale studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 10 minutes. But if anyone tries to stop you, if anyone threatens you, scream, and I will come. Understood? Alara did not waste time arguing the absurdity of his offer. He could barely stand, let alone fight, but she appreciated the sentiment, the instinct to protect that seemed to override his own dire condition. She ran. The slave quarters were located at the edge of the compound, a long, low building that housed 30 wolves in conditions barely better than the cages used for livestock. Alara slipped inside as quietly as possible, moving through the darkness with the ease of someone who had navigated this space thousands of times. Helena was awake, as she always was on clear nights, sitting by the small window and watching the stars she might never see from anywhere but this prison. Her white hair glowed faintly in the moonlight, and her weathered face turned toward Alara with the calm acceptance of someone who had long ago made peace with whatever fate delivered. "Child, you look like you have seen a ghost." Alara knelt beside the old woman, her hands gripping Helena's thin wrists with desperate urgency. "Listen to me carefully. I freed a prisoner from the deep mines, not just any prisoner, the Alpha King of Frostholm. He is alive, and I am helping him escape. When the guards realize he is gone, they are going to punish everyone here looking for who helped him. You need to wake the others. Take the children and anyone who can travel. Get as far from this place as possible. Run, Helena. Please." Helena's eyes went wide, but her voice remained steady. "What have you done, child?" "What I had to. What my parents would have wanted me to do." Helena was silent for a long moment, her ancient eyes searching Alara's face for something that only she could name. Then she nodded slowly. "There is something you should know before you go, something I heard the guards discussing weeks ago that I did not tell you because I thought it would only bring you pain." Alara's heart clenched. "What?" "There is an assassin in Shadowmere's ranks, young, perhaps 15 or 16. They call him the Silver Ghost because of his hair, pure white, they say, like snow on a winter morning." Helena's grip tightened on Alara's hands. "He has your eyes, child. That same gray-blue that I remember from when you first came here with your brother." The world tilted beneath Alara's feet. "That is not possible. Damon died. They told me he died of lung sickness." "They told you what they wanted you to believe. I have no proof of anything. Only rumors, whispers, the way soldiers talk when they think no one is listening. But I wanted you to know. If there is even a chance that your brother lives, perhaps this Alpha King of yours can help you find him." Alara wanted to stay, wanted to ask more questions, wanted to process the impossible hope that Helena's words had ignited. But there was no time. Every second she delayed was a second closer to discovery, to death, to the end of everything she was trying to save. She kissed Helena's forehead, a gesture of love and farewell that felt wholly inadequate for what the old woman had meant to her. "Run, Helena. Promise me you will run." "I promise, child. Now go. Find your king. Find your brother. Find the life that was stolen from you." Alara woke as many slaves as she could in the time she had, whispering urgent warnings and directions to flee. Some believed her immediately and began gathering their meager possessions. Others thought she had gone mad from silver poisoning. A few were too sick or too old to move, resigned to whatever fate awaited them. She did what she could. She gave them the choice. Then she returned to Kyle before her 10 minutes were up. He was leaning against the mine entrance, his legs shaking with the effort of staying upright, but his eyes tracked her movement with sharp awareness the moment she appeared. "Did they listen?" "Some of them. The ones who can run will run. The ones who cannot will face whatever comes." Her voice cracked slightly. "I did what I could." Kale's expression softened, and for a moment he looked almost human instead of the legendary Alpha King who inspired terror in his enemies. "That is all anyone can do. Come, we need to cover as much ground as possible before sunrise." They walked into the forest, leaving behind the only home Alara had known for 7 years. The night air was cold and clean after the suffocating heat of the mines, and she found herself breathing deeply, filling her lungs with freedom, even as fear churned in her stomach. Kael was struggling. Each step seemed to cost him more than the last, his breathing growing more labored, his weight leaning increasingly on her shoulder. The silver poisoning was progressing, his supernatural healing unable to cope with the damage while he remained so weak. "Tell me about yourself." His voice was rough but curious, and Alara realized he was trying to stay conscious by keeping conversation flowing. "There is not much to tell. I was born in Silverbrook Pack. They destroyed us 7 years ago over a river border dispute. I have been in the mines ever since." Silverbrook. I remember hearing about that attack. The council condemned it, but Shadowmere ignored the censure. They have been ignoring council rulings for over a decade now. "And what has the council done about it?" Kael was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, there was something heavy in his voice. "Not enough. Never enough. That is why I came here myself, to negotiate directly with their alpha. I thought perhaps face-to-face talks might accomplish what formal diplomacy had failed to achieve. That seems foolish for an alpha king, walking into enemy territory alone." "I was not alone. I brought a small contingent of my most trusted advisors and guards, but we were ambushed before we reached the meeting point. Someone knew our exact route, our exact timing, our exact numbers." Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "You are saying someone betrayed you?" "I am saying that 5 years ago, I led 200 warriors into what was supposed to be a decisive strike against Shadowmere's main compound. We were ambushed. Nearly all of them died. I survived only because my second-in-command dragged my unconscious body from the battlefield and carried me 3 days back to our territory." He stopped walking, turning to face her with eyes that held 5 years of guilt and grief. "I blamed myself. My tactics, my arrogance, my failure to anticipate the enemy's movements. I have carried those deaths for half a decade, believing that my own inadequacy killed my people. But now you think differently. Now I know that someone in my own council has been feeding information to Shadowmere for years. The ambush 5 years ago was not a failure of my leadership. It was a betrayal by someone I trusted. And that same traitor revealed my travel plans for this peace delegation." Alara stared at him, processing the implications. "You came here knowing you might be walking into a trap?" "I came here hoping to expose the traitor by seeing who knew my plans and who did not. I thought I could control the situation." A bitter smile crossed his face. "Obviously, I was wrong." They continued walking, the forest growing denser around them as they moved north. Alara's mind was churning with everything she had learned. An alpha king betrayed by his own people. A brother she had thought dead, possibly alive as an enemy assassin. A future suddenly uncertain in ways she had never anticipated. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky when Kael finally collapsed. They had covered perhaps 5 miles from the Shadowmere compound, not nearly far enough to be safe. Alara had been practically carrying him for the last hour, her muscles screaming with exhaustion, her own strength nearly gone. "We need to stop. You need rest." Kael tried to shake his head, but could not manage even that simple motion. "Cannot stop. Not safe. They will have hunting parties out by now. We keep moving or we die." But his legs gave out before he could take another step, and they both went down in a heap on the forest floor. He tried to rise, his arms shaking with the effort, but his body had finally reached its limit. The silver poisoning had progressed too far, his system shutting down from days of torture and exposure to the metal that was toxic to wolfkind. Alara knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his burned skin, desperate to help but not knowing how. She had learned basic medicine in the mines, enough to keep slaves alive since dead workers were worthless. But this was beyond her skill. He needed a real healer, medicine, time, and care that she could not provide in the middle of a forest while running for their lives. "In my left boot, there is a vial, emergency healing potion. Take it out." Alara fumbled with his boot, finding a small glass vial tucked into a hidden pocket. The liquid inside glowed faintly blue, and when she uncorked it, the smell was sharp and medicinal. "What is this?" "Concentrated wolfsbane mixed with silver extract. I know it sounds like poison, but for silver poisoning, you fight fire with fire. The wolfsbane neutralizes the silver in my bloodstream. It will hurt, but it will keep me alive long enough to reach my territory." She helped him sit up enough to drink, supporting his head as he swallowed the potion in one gulp. The effect was immediate and violent. His body convulsed, his back arching as he screamed through gritted teeth, and Alara held him as best she could while he thrashed. She could smell the silver being purged from his system, could see the burns on his skin beginning to close as his supernatural healing finally activated properly. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Kyle went limp in her arms, his breathing evening out, his fever breaking. He was still weak, still injured, but no longer on the verge of death. "Rest, just for a little while. I will keep watch." Kyle's hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who had just been convulsing. "You saved my life twice now, once in the mines and once just now. I owe you everything." "You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone should have done." "No." His eyes were intense despite his exhaustion. "You did what most would not. You risked your life, your safety, your friends, everything you had to free a stranger. You are either the bravest person I have ever met or the most foolish, and right now I am too grateful to care which." They rested for 2 hours while the sun climbed higher in the sky. Alara dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, certain that hunting parties were closing in, but the forest remained quiet except for birds and small animals. No signs of pursuit yet. When Kyle woke, he looked better. His burns were still visible but healing, his strength returning slowly as his body recovered. He could walk on his own now, though Alara stayed close in case he needed support. They moved faster, covering ground at a pace that would have been impossible with Kyle in his previous condition. The forest began to change around them, the trees growing taller and older, the air becoming crisper and cleaner. "We are approaching the border. Another mile and we will be in Frostholm territory." Alara should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of Helena's words pressing down on her. "I need to tell you something, before we reach your people." Kyle looked at her with curiosity, but not suspicion. "I am listening. My brother. I was told he died 7 years ago, shortly after we were captured. But tonight, before I came back to you, one of the other slaves told me something. There is an assassin in Shadowmere's ranks. Young, maybe 15 or 16. They call him the Silver Ghost. He has white hair and gray-blue eyes." Her voice broke. "He sounds like my brother." Kale was silent for a long moment. "If your brother has been trained as an assassin for 7 years, since he was 8 years old, he may not be the person you remember. He may not even recognize you as family anymore." "I know, but I have to find out. I have to know if he is alive. I have to try." Kyle nodded slowly, and there was understanding in his eyes. "Then we will find out together. I have resources, intelligence networks, scouts who move through Shadowmere territory regularly. If your brother is alive, we will find him." Before Alara could respond, Kyle tensed suddenly, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air. "We need to run. Now. There are wolves coming, at least a dozen. Shadowmere hunting party." They ran. Kyle's hand was tight around Alara's wrist as he pulled her through the forest at a pace she could not have maintained alone. Behind them, she could hear crashing through the undergrowth, could hear the howls of wolves on the hunt. The Shadowmere pack had realized their prize prisoner was gone, and they were not happy about it. "I cannot outrun them," Alara gasped, her lungs burning, her legs shaking. "I am not a warrior. I am just an Omega. You need to leave me and save yourself." Kyle pulled her behind a massive oak tree, pinning her against the trunk with his body. His eyes were glowing with his wolf's presence, his voice low and urgent. "Listen to me very carefully. When they get here, I'm going to shift and fight them off. You are going to keep running north. Do not stop, do not look back. When you cross into Frostholm territory, my wolves will sense you. Tell them you are with me. Tell them Kael sent you. They will protect you." "You cannot fight 12 wolves alone. You are still weak. They will kill you." Kael smiled, and it was a terrible thing full of teeth and promise of violence. "I am the Alpha King. I have fought worse odds and won, but I need to know you are safe before I can focus on the fight. Promise me you will run. Promise me you will not try to help." Alara wanted to refuse, wanted to stay and fight beside him, even though she had no combat training and would probably just get in the way. But looking into his ice-blue eyes, seeing the determination there, she found herself nodding. "I promise, but you had better survive this. I did not cut all those chains just so you could die in the forest." He kissed her then, not on the lips but on the forehead, a gesture of respect and promise and something else that she could not name. "Run, Alara, and do not stop until you are safe." Then he was shifting, his body expanding and changing, bones restructuring and fur sprouting, until where Kael had stood, now crouched a massive white wolf with ice-blue eyes. He was easily twice the size of a normal wolf, pure muscle and barely contained rage. He turned toward the approaching hunting party and howled, a sound of challenge and fury that echoed through the forest. Alara ran. She ran like she had never run before. Her legs pumped, her heart raced, branches whipped at her face and caught in her clothes. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle, snarls and yelps and the snap of breaking bones. She wanted to look back, wanted to see if Kael was winning, but she had made him a promise. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed at the base of a tree with her lungs burning and her vision spotting. She did not know how long she had been running, did not know how far she had come, did not know if she had crossed into Frostholm territory yet. Then she heard the growl, low and threatening, coming from her left. Alara's head snapped up to find herself surrounded by 6 massive wolves. All of them watched her with suspicious eyes, their bodies tense and ready to attack at the slightest provocation. She scrambled to her feet, backing against the tree, trying to make herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Please, I am with Kael, the Alpha King. He sent me. He told me to run to Frostholm territory and find his wolves. Please, I am not a threat." The largest wolf, a massive gray beast with amber eyes, shifted in a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice. The man who appeared was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 40 years old, with gray streaked hair and a scar running down the left side of his face. His expression was hard, but not cruel as he studied her. "You are the slave girl, the one who freed our king from the mines." Alara's heart lurched with hope. "You know about me?" "We have been tracking his scent since last night, trying to find him before the enemy did. We picked up speed when we heard fighting to the south." His eyes narrowed. "Where is he?" "He stayed behind to fight off the hunting party. 12 Shadowmere wolves. He made me promise to run while he held them off." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please, you have to help him. He is still weak from the silver poisoning. They will kill him." The gray-haired man's expression hardened, and he barked orders to the other wolves in quick, commanding tones. 4 of them immediately raced off toward the sounds of battle, moving at speeds that seemed impossible. The remaining wolf, a smaller brown-furred female, shifted to human form and approached Alara cautiously. She was perhaps 30 years old, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that assessed Alara with professional detachment. "I am Raven, commander of Kael's elite guard. This is Brennan, his second in command. You are safe now. You are in Frostholm territory. No one can hurt you here." Alara's legs finally gave out completely, and she slid down the tree trunk to sit on the forest floor. All the adrenaline that had kept her going suddenly drained away. Is he going to be okay? Will he survive? If anyone can survive 12 against 1 while still recovering from silver poisoning, it is our king. Brennan's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "He is the strongest alpha born in 3 generations. But I will not lie to you. If he is as weak as you say, this will be a hard fight." They waited in tense silence, Raven keeping watch while Alara tried to catch her breath and stop her hands from shaking. Minutes crawled by like hours, every sound making her jump, every distant noise making her fear the worst. She had freed Kael from certain death only to send him into a battle he might not survive. If he died out there, it would be her fault for running like he asked instead of staying to fight by his side. When the 4 wolves finally returned, Kael was with them. He was in human form, supported between 2 of his guards, covered in fresh blood that mixed with his healing silver burns. But he was alive. His ice-blue eyes found Alara immediately, and despite everything, despite the wounds and the exhaustion and the near-death experience, he smiled. "Told you I would survive." Alara ran to him, not caring about the blood or the naked guards or anything except that he was alive. She crashed into him hard enough that the guards grunted with the impact, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressing against his chest. "You are an idiot, a complete and total idiot who almost died." Kael's arms came around her, holding her close despite his obvious exhaustion. "But I did not die, because I had you to come back to." Brennan cleared his throat loudly. "Perhaps we should continue this reunion somewhere more secure, like back at the palace, where our king can get proper medical attention and we can figure out what exactly happened." The palace. Alara would be going to the palace of an Alpha King, walking into a world she had never imagined being part of, facing a future she could not predict. Behind her lay 7 years of slavery, of loss, of survival at any cost. Ahead lay something unknown, something terrifying, something that might finally give her the chance to find out if her brother was truly alive. She looked at Kael, at his ice-blue eyes that held pain and determination, and something else that made her heart race in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Let us go, then. We have a traitor to find, and maybe a brother." Kael nodded, respect and something warmer flickering in his gaze. "Then welcome to Frostholm, Alara of Silverbrook. Let us see what the future holds." The palace of Frostholm rose from the mountain like a frozen dream given form. Alara had spent 7 years imagining what freedom might look like, but her fantasies had never included anything like this. Towers of gray stone climbed toward the sky, their surfaces gleaming with morning frost that caught the early light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The main structure sprawled across the mountainside in a way that suggested it had grown organically over centuries, each generation adding their own wing, their own tower, their own mark upon the ancestral home. Guards in silver and blue livery lined the approach road, their posture snapping to attention as they recognized their king among the returning party. Alara could feel their eyes on her, could sense the questions burning behind their disciplined silence. Who was this ragged woman walking beside their alpha? Why did she wear the rough clothing of a slave? Why did their king look at her as though she mattered? She kept her spine straight and her eyes forward, refusing to show the terror that churned in her stomach. 7 years of slavery had taught her that showing weakness invited exploitation. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same stubborn dignity that had kept her alive in the mines. Kael walked beside her without assistance now, his supernatural healing having closed most of his visible wounds during the journey. But Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, could sense the weight of what awaited him inside those imposing walls. He was returning home not in triumph, but in the aftermath of betrayal, and the reckoning would not be pleasant. The great hall was already crowded when they entered. Word of the king's return had spread faster than their traveling party, and it seemed every wolf of significance had gathered to witness his homecoming. Alara counted at least 50 people, their ranks ranging from elderly wolves in formal robes to young warriors still wearing training gear. At the far end of the hall, raised on a platform of polished stone, stood a carved throne that somehow managed to look both ancient and dangerous. The wolves gathered before it parted as Kael approached, their murmurs falling silent as they took in his condition and his unexpected companion. A man stepped forward from the assembled council. He was perhaps 55 years old, with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a lifelong soldier. His face was weathered by decades of warfare, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who viewed the world as a series of strategic problems to be solved. Lord Varen. Alara knew his type. The mines had been full of men like him, Men who believed their experience entitled them to power, and their power entitled them to cruelty. "My king." Varen's voice was deep and formal, carrying easily through the silent hall. "We are relieved to see you alive. When your delegation failed to return, we feared the worst." "Your fears were nearly realized." Kael's voice was equally formal, but there was an edge beneath the courtesy that made several of the gathered wolves shift uncomfortably. "I was captured during the peace negotiations, imprisoned in the deep mines, chained with silver, and left to die." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Whatever they had expected to hear, this was clearly worse. The Shadowmere Alpha violated the sacred tradition of the white flag? Varen's outrage seemed genuine, but Alara noticed his hands remained steady at his sides. A man truly surprised would show more involuntary reaction. "This is an act of war. We must respond immediately." "We will discuss response in council." Kael turned slightly, his hand gesturing toward Alara. "First, I want everyone to see the woman who saved my life. This is Alara of Silverbrook Pack. She found me in the mines, cut through 200 pounds of silver chains, and helped me escape Shadowmere territory. Without her, I would be dead. She is to be treated as an honored guest of this pack, with all the rights and protections that status entails." Alara felt every eye in the hall turn toward her. She forced herself to meet their gazes, to let them see a woman who had walked through 7 years of hell and emerged unbroken. Some looked curious, some looked skeptical, a few looked openly hostile. Varen was among the latter, though he hid it well. "A slave from Shadowmere's mines?" His tone was carefully neutral, but the implication was clear. "Forgive me, my king, but how can we be certain she is not a plant? An agent sent to infiltrate our pack under cover of a convenient rescue?" She cut through silver with her bare hands. Kael's voice carried a warning that made Varen take a small step backward. "She risked torture and death to free a stranger. She led me through territory she knew intimately while I was too weak to protect myself. If that was an elaborate deception, then I welcome such deception into my home." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension. Alara could see the battle lines forming, could identify which wolves supported their king unconditionally and which questioned his judgment. The politics of pack life were apparently as brutal here as they had been in the mines, just dressed in finer clothing. A woman pushed through the crowd and threw herself at Kael, with a cry that held equal parts relief and fury. She was perhaps 25, with the same platinum blonde hair as the king, and eyes that shifted between green and gold as the light caught them. "You idiot! You absolute idiot! I told you not to go. I told you it was a trap. But you never listened to me. You never listened to anyone." Kael caught her in his arms, holding her close despite her pounding fists against his chest. "Hello to you too, Isolde." His sister. Alara filed the information away, noting the genuine affection between the siblings and the way the crowd softened at the display. Whatever political tensions existed in this hall, the love between Kael and his sister was clearly accepted and even celebrated. Isolde pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and turned to look at Alara with curiosity rather than suspicion. "So you are the one who brought him back. I owe you a debt that I do not know how to repay." "You owe me nothing." The words came automatically, the deflection of someone unused to gratitude. "I did what needed to be done. And that is exactly why I owe you." Isolde smiled, and there was warmth in it that Alara did not know how to process. "Come, you look like you have not had a proper meal or a real bed in years. Let me show you to guest quarters while my brother deals with the council." Alara glanced at Kael, uncertain whether she was being politely dismissed or genuinely welcomed. He met her eyes and nodded slightly, an acknowledgement that seemed to communicate volumes in a single gesture. "Go, rest, recover. We will talk more soon." She followed Isolde out of the great hall, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked her departure. Behind her, she could hear Kael's voice rising as he began to address his council, the words too distant to make out, but the tone unmistakably commanding. The guest quarters were larger than the entire slave barracks where Alara had spent the last 7 years. Pasasti. A proper bed dominated one wall, covered in furs and blankets that looked softer than anything she had touched since childhood. Windows looked out over the mountain valley below, offering a view of forests and rivers and distant peaks that seemed to stretch into infinity. Isolde lingered in the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I do not know. Someone more broken, perhaps? You have been a slave for 7 years. Most people would not survive that with their spirit intact." Alara thought of all the ways she was broken, all the cracks and scars that did not show on the surface. She thought of the nightmares that still woke her in cold sweats, the flinch response that certain sounds could trigger, the difficulty she had looking anyone in the eye for too long. Surviving and being unbroken are not the same thing. Isolde nodded slowly, and there was understanding in her eyes that spoke of her own hidden wounds. "No, they are not." She stepped back toward the door. "Rest, eat. There will be time for everything else later." The first 2 months in Frostholm passed in a blur of adjustment and observation. Alara refused to remain idle, refused to accept charity without offering something in return. She found her way to the healing lodge on her 3rd day, drawn by the familiar smells of herbs and medicines that reminded her of Helena's teachings in the mines. The head healer was a woman named Sage, 60 years old with wild gray hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see everything. She had been skeptical of Alara at first, suspicious of a former slave's claims to medical knowledge, but skepticism had turned to grudging respect as Alara demonstrated her skills. She knew the herbs that grew in the shadow of mountains, the ones that thrived in dark, damp conditions like mine tunnels. She knew how to treat silver burns, how to clean wounds that had been contaminated with ore dust, how to recognize the early signs of lung sickness that claimed so many miners. Her knowledge was practical rather than formal, learned through desperation rather than study, but it was real and it was valuable. "Who taught you all this?" Sage asked one afternoon, watching as Alara prepared a poultice for a young warrior who had managed to impale himself on his own training weapon. "An old Omega named Helena. She was a healer before Shadowmere destroyed her pack. She taught me everything she knew because she said knowledge was the one thing they could not take from us." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She is the reason I am still alive." Alara's hand stilled for a moment, grief flickering across her face before she pushed it down. "I hope she made it out. I told her to run, but I do not know if she listened." Sage was quiet for a moment, watching Alara with those knowing eyes. "Show me your hands." The request seemed strange, but Alara had learned to pick her battles. She held out her hands, palms up, revealing the network of faint silver scars that marked her skin. Sage's intake of breath was sharp. "These are silver contact scars, but they are old, healed, and there are far too many of them for someone who should have been burning every time she touched the metal." Alara considered lying, considered maintaining the secret she had kept for 7 years. But something about Sage's expression, the clinical curiosity rather than predatory interest, made her decide to trust. "I am silver resistant. I can touch the metal for 10 to 15 minutes before the burning starts, and I heal from exposure faster than normal wolves." Sage stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. "Of course you are. Of course the woman who saved our king by cutting through silver chains happens to be one of the rarest genetic variants in wolfkind." She shook her head, still chuckling. "The moon goddess has a sense of humor. You know about this condition?" "I have read about it, never seen it in person. The silver resistance gene appears in perhaps 1 in 5,000 wolves, with varying degrees of effectiveness. You are describing the highest level of resistance recorded in medical literature." Sage leaned forward, her eyes bright with scientific interest. "This is not magic, child. It is genetics, a mutation that affects how your body processes silver at a cellular level, rare as diamonds and twice as valuable. In the mines, it would have gotten me worked to death. Here, it makes you invaluable." Sage's expression grew serious. "You should tell the king. This ability could be crucial if we go to war with Shadowmere." "I will consider it." But Alara did not tell Kale immediately. She was still learning to trust, still testing the boundaries of her new situation, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. 7 years of slavery had taught her that good fortune was always temporary, and kindness always had a price. Kael, for his part, seemed to understand her caution. He did not push, did not demand, did not use his authority to force her into anything. Instead, he began appearing at the healing lodge with minor injuries that clearly did not require attention, asking her advice on matters that he could easily have handled himself. At first, Elara was confused by these visits. Then she realized what he was doing. He was creating opportunities for them to talk, to build a relationship based on conversation rather than obligation. He was courting her in his own quiet way, without ever making her feel trapped or pressured. "You do not need a healer to tell you that a paper cut will heal on its own," she told him one afternoon, her voice dry as she examined his allegedly wounded finger. "Perhaps I simply enjoy the company. You are the Alpha King. You have an entire palace full of people competing for your company. And yet somehow none of them make me feel as comfortable as sitting in this lodge watching you work." Elara looked up and found him studying her with those ice-blue eyes, his expression open in a way she had rarely seen from him. In public, Kael was formal and commanding, every inch the Alpha King. But here, in the quiet of the healing lodge, he was simply a man who had been saved by a woman and was trying to understand what she meant to him. "Tell me about your pack," she said, changing the subject. "About Frostholm. I have been here for 2 months and I still feel like I know nothing." So he told her. He talked about growing up as the heir to a kingdom he never asked for, about the weight of expectations that had been placed on his shoulders since birth. He talked about his sister Isolde, who was the only person in the world who could make him laugh during the darkest times. He talked about Brennan, his second-in-command and best friend, who had saved his life during the disaster 5 years ago and had been his anchor ever since. And eventually, hesitantly, he talked about the disaster itself. 200 warriors followed me into Shadowmere territory. I was young and arrogant, convinced that a decisive strike would end the conflict quickly. I had planned the attack for months, had accounted for every variable, had been so certain of victory. His voice grew heavy with remembered grief. We were ambushed 2 hours from the target. They knew exactly where we would be and exactly when we would arrive. It was a slaughter. I watched wolves I had known since childhood die in front of me, and there was nothing I could do to save them. Brennan dragged me out when I was too wounded to walk, carried me for 3 days through enemy territory until we reached the border. That was not your fault. I was the commander. Everything that happens under my command is my fault. Being the commander does not make you responsible for betrayal." Elara set down the herbs she had been sorting and turned to face him fully. "You said someone gave away your plans. Someone told Shadowmere where you would be. That person killed your wolves, not you." Kael's expression flickered with something between hope and fear. "For 5 years I have carried those deaths. I have questioned every decision I made, every assumption I relied on, every moment of arrogance that might have contributed to the disaster. Learning that there was a traitor does not erase my responsibility. It just adds fury to the guilt. Knowing about the traitor will not bring them back." Elara's voice was soft but firm. "But it might save the ones who come next." He looked at her with new respect, as if seeing something in her that he had not noticed before. "You do not offer empty comfort. I have lost enough people to know that empty comfort helps no one." She returned to her herbs, giving him space to process. "Find your traitor. Make them pay. That is the only real comfort for the dead." Brennan had begun investigating from the very first day Kael returned to Frostholm. While Elara adjusted to her new life, while she learned to trust and to heal, the king's second-in-command had been quietly tracing every leak, every failure, every moment when Shadowmere had known things they should not have known. 5 months of careful work, running parallel to Elara's own journey from slave to valued member of the pack, finally yielded results. Elara was included in the final stages of the investigation because of her knowledge of Shadowmere, her understanding of how the enemy operated. She spent long hours with Kael and Brennan, mapping timelines, identifying patterns, analyzing every piece of information that had leaked over the past 5 years. It was Brennan who finally presented their findings, his scarred face grim as he laid out the evidence. Every leak required access to 3 categories of information: patrol schedules and routes, strategic planning documents, personnel assignments for sensitive operations. He spread papers across the table in Kael's private study. In the past 5 years, only 5 people have had consistent access to all 3 categories. He listed the names: Elder Aldrich, the ancient head of the council; Lord Varon, the former general; Commander Stone, who led the eastern defenses; Lady Mirren, who had overseen intelligence operations; and Brennan himself. "I want to be eliminated first," Brennan said, his voice steady. "Verify my whereabouts during each leak. Remove any possibility that I could be the traitor before we proceed." Kael's expression was pained. "Brennan, I would never suspect you." "That is exactly why you need to verify. If you clear me based on trust alone, it undermines the entire investigation. Facts matter more than feelings." The verification took 2 weeks. Brennan's alibis held. His whereabouts during each information leak placed him nowhere near any communication with Shadowmere. He was cleared. Elder Aldrich was next. The old wolf had served 3 generations of kings, and his loyalty was beyond question. More importantly, during 2 of the most significant leaks, he had been confined to bed with an illness that left him too weak to even write letters, let alone conduct espionage. Lady Mirren had died 2 years earlier, which eliminated her from consideration. Commander Stone had been on the front lines during every leak, his position making it physically impossible for him to have passed information, which left Lord Varon. "It is circumstantial," Kael said, frustration evident in his voice. "We cannot prove it. We only know that he could have done it, not that he did." "Then we set a trap." Elara spoke for the first time in the discussion, her mind working through the problem. "Feed different information to each suspect. See which version reaches Shadowmere." Brennan nodded slowly. "A classic approach. We tell each remaining person a different story about supply routes or patrol movements. Whichever story the enemy acts on reveals the source." They chose their bait carefully. A supply convoy supposedly traveling through Red Valley, carrying medical supplies and silver weapons. Each remaining suspect was given a slightly different version of the story. Different dates, different routes, different cargo manifests. 2 weeks later, Frostholm scouts reported that Shadowmere forces had set an ambush in Red Valley. The date, route, and expected cargo matched the version they had fed to Lord Varon. The trap had worked. But before they could act on the revelation, everything changed. It was near the end of Alara's 6th month in Frostholm, just weeks after Brennan presented his findings, when the refugees arrived at the border. 15 wolves, exhausted and malnourished, led by a white-haired Omega that Alara would have recognized anywhere. Helena had survived. Alara ran to her, crossing the courtyard at a sprint that startled the guards and caused Kael to follow in alarm. She caught the old woman in an embrace that was probably too tight for Helena's fragile frame, but she could not bring herself to let go. "You made it. You actually made it." "You told me to run, child. I listened." Helena's voice was weaker than Alara remembered, but her eyes still held that knowing wisdom. "Took us 3 months to find safe passage, but we are here." The refugees were brought inside, fed and examined by healers. Most were in poor condition but would recover. A few had injuries that would require extended care. All of them looked at Alara with something approaching reverence, as if she were a figure from legend rather than the fellow slave who had once shared their barracks. Later, when the immediate crisis had been addressed, Helena asked to speak with Alara privately. Kael insisted on being present, sensing that whatever the old woman had to say was important. They gathered in a small chamber away from curious ears. Helena sat with the careful movements of someone whose body was failing faster than her spirit, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "I bring news from Shadowmere. None of it is good." The first revelation was expected but still chilling. Shadowmere was preparing for total war. Commander Theron had been gathering allies, stockpiling weapons, and drilling his forces for an assault on Frostholm. The attack was planned for 3 months from now, at the height of winter when Shadowmere's cold, adapted wolves would have an advantage. The second revelation confirmed what they had already discovered. Theron had spoken openly about his friend in Frostholm, a highly placed contact who had been providing intelligence for years. The traitor was real, and Shadowmere was confident of victory because of the information they expected to receive. But it was the third revelation that shattered Alara's world. There is a young assassin in Theron's personal guard. They call him the Silver Ghost. Helena's voice grew gentle, her eyes filled with compassion. I saw him once, during a punishment ceremony in the main courtyard. He executed 3 prisoners without hesitation, moving so fast that the crowd barely saw him strike. Alara felt her blood turning to ice. I watched him carefully, child. Watched him because something about his face tugged at my memory. His hair is white, like yours. His eyes are gray-blue, like yours. And on his left wrist, partially hidden by his sleeve, there is a scar. Helena reached out to take Alara's hand. A scar shaped like a small fish. The same scar your brother got when he was 5 years old, when the fishing hook slipped and cut him deep. The world tilted beneath Alara's feet. Damon, her brother. The 8-year-old boy she had last seen being dragged away by Shadowmere soldiers, his screams echoing in her memory for 7 years. The brother she had been told was dead. He was alive. He was an assassin. He was the enemy. No. The word came out as a whisper, barely audible. No, that cannot be right. He was just a child. He was gentle. He cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. He could not hurt anyone. 7 years is a long time, child. Long enough to break anyone. Long enough to build a killer from the pieces. Alara's legs gave out. She would have collapsed to the floor if Cale had not caught her, his arms wrapping around her as she crumbled. The tears came then, violent sobs that tore through her body, grief and hope and horror all tangled together in a storm she could not control. Cale held her through it all. He did not speak, did not offer empty words of comfort, did not try to fix what could not be fixed. He simply held her while she fell apart, his presence an anchor in the chaos of her emotions, his warmth a reminder that she was not alone. When the worst of the storm had passed, when Alara could breathe again without sobbing, Cale finally spoke. We will find him. Whatever he has become, whatever they made him do, he is still your brother. We will find him, and we will bring him home. He may not want to come. He may not even remember me. Then we will remind him. We will show him who he used to be. And if it does not work, if he is truly gone? Cale was silent for a long moment, his arms still holding her close. Then at least you will know. One way or another, you will have an answer. That has to be worth something. It was worth everything, and nothing. And Alara did not know how to hold both truths at once. The next day, they moved against Lord Varon. The confrontation took place in the Great Hall, before the assembled council and the gathered pack. Cale stood before his throne, Brennan at his right hand, Alara in the crowd with the other observers. The hall was packed to capacity, wolves pressed shoulder to shoulder, all of them sensing that something momentous was about to occur. Lord Varon entered with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. His gray hair was perfectly groomed, his formal robes immaculate, his bearing that of a respected elder who had earned his position through decades of service. You called an emergency session, my king. I trust there is good reason for pulling us all from our duties. There is. Cale's voice was cold in a way that made several wolves step back involuntarily. 5 months ago, I was captured by Shadowmere during peace negotiations. I have spent those months wondering how the enemy knew exactly where I would be and exactly how to neutralize my guards. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In that time, my people have been investigating. They have traced every information leak over the past 5 years, every failure that cost Frostholm lives and territory. They have found patterns. They have identified access. They have narrowed the possibilities to a single conclusion." Varen's expression did not change, but Alara noticed his weight shifting slightly, preparing for action. 3 weeks ago, we set a trap. We fed different information to different suspects, false details about a supply convoy through Red Valley. Each suspect received a unique version. Kale's eyes locked onto Varen. "Shadowmere ambushed Red Valley on the exact date and route that only you were told." The hall erupted in shocked whispers. Varen's face finally showed a reaction, but not the one Alara had expected. Instead of denial or outrage, he simply looked tired. "And what will you do about it, Kale? Execute me? Imprison me? Make a martyr of the wolf who was willing to do what you would not? You admit it then." "I admit nothing and everything." Varen's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the hall. 5 years ago, you had the chance to destroy Shadowmere. You failed. Since then, you have done nothing but talk and negotiate and compromise while our enemy grew stronger. Someone had to force action. Someone had to create a crisis large enough to wake you from your cowardly slumber. You killed 200 of our warriors. I created the conditions for their deaths. Shadowmere did the actual killing, and if you had responded properly to that tragedy, if you had marshaled our forces and struck back immediately, their deaths would have meant something. Instead, you retreated, you negotiated, you let our enemy believe they could violate every law of wolfkind without consequence. Kale's hands clenched at his sides, his control visibly straining. You sold your pack to the enemy because you disagreed with my leadership. I tried to save my pack from a king too weak to protect them. Then let us see how the pack feels about your methods." Kyle turned to address the crowd. "Lord Varen admits to passing intelligence to Shadowmere for 5 years. He admits to causing the deaths of 200 warriors. He stands before you unrepentant, believing that his ends justified his means. What say you?" The response was immediate and overwhelming. Shouts of rage, cries for execution, wolves pressing forward as if to tear Varen apart with their bare hands. Whatever support the former general might have once commanded had evaporated in the face of his confession. Guards moved to arrest him. That was when everything went wrong. A door at the side of the hall burst open, and Ronan, one of the senior guard captains, strode through with a knife at Isolde's throat. The princess was pale but composed, her green-gold eyes fixed on her brother with a message Alara could not read. "Nobody moves!" Ronan's voice cut through the chaos, freezing everyone in place. "One step toward Lord Varen, and the princess dies." Varen was already moving toward the side door, his elderly facade dropping away to reveal the dangerous soldier he had always been. "You should have moved faster, Kale. Should have struck without warning. Now your sister pays the price for your caution." "Let her go." Kale's voice was deadly quiet. "Whatever your grievance is with me, she is innocent." "Innocent?" Varen laughed. "There are no innocents in war, boy. You should have learned that by now. Isolde will accompany me to Shadowmere as insurance. If you attack, she dies. If you send assassins, she dies. If you do anything other than sit here and wait for Theron's army to arrive, she dies." "Father!" Seraphina stepped out from behind Ronan, her face unreadable. "This was not the plan." "Plans change, daughter. The king forced our hand by exposing us publicly. Now we improvise." Alara watched Seraphina carefully, saw the calculation behind her eyes, saw the way she looked at her father with something that was not quite loyalty. There were cracks in their alliance, fractures that might be exploited later. But later would not save Isolde now. Varen and his people were backing toward the door, Isolde held firmly between them and any possible attack. Kyle stood frozen, his whole body vibrating with the need to act, and the knowledge that action would mean his sister's death. "This is not over," he said, his voice carrying a promise that made even Varen pause. "No, it is not. But by the time it ends, you will wish you had listened to me years ago. War is coming, Kale. The only question is whether you will finally be ready to fight it." They were gone through the door before anyone could react, disappearing into passages that Varen clearly knew better than anyone had suspected. By the time pursuit was organized, they had vanished into the mountains, taking Isolde with them. The great hall was silent in the aftermath, shock and horror on every face. Their princess had been taken, their traitor had escaped. Their enemy had just gained both a hostage and a tactical advisor. Chael stood before his throne, and for the first time since Alara had known him, he looked truly lost. The weight of his failures, past and present, seemed to press down on his shoulders like a physical force. For a moment, she thought he might break. Then his expression hardened into something cold and terrible. "Council, hear me." His voice rang through the hall like a war drum. "For 5 years, I have pursued peace with Shadowmere. I have negotiated, compromised, restrained our response when provocation demanded action. I believed that patience and diplomacy could achieve what violence could not." He paused, his ice-blue eyes sweeping across the assembly. "I was wrong. The traitor in our midst has proven that some enemies cannot be reasoned with. They can only be destroyed. Shadowmere has violated the sacred traditions of parley. They have enslaved innocent wolves. They have sheltered a traitor who murdered 200 of our people. And now they have taken my sister." His hands clenched into fists. "No more negotiation, no more patience, no more restraint. We go to war." The hall erupted in cheers, relief and bloodlust mingling in a roar that shook the ancient stones. But Alara felt only cold certainty settling into her bones. Chael found her after the crowd had dispersed, his face still wearing that terrible hardness. "I need your help. You know Shadowmere's compound better than anyone else available to me. I need you to help plan the assault. My brother is there. I know. He is their assassin, their weapon. He will probably try to kill us." "I know that too." Chael's expression softened slightly. "I will not ask you to fight him. I will not ask you to be part of any operation that might force that confrontation. But I need your knowledge. I need your maps, your understanding of their defenses, your insight into how they operate." Alara thought of Damon as she had last seen him, 8 years old and terrified, screaming her name as the soldiers dragged him away. She thought of the Silver Ghost, the assassin who killed without hesitation. She thought of the years between, the transformation that she could not quite imagine, but could not deny. "I will help you, but not because you are ordering me to. I would never order you to do anything. I know. That is why I am choosing this." She met his eyes, letting him see the steel beneath her grief. "My brother is in that place. My friends were enslaved in those mines. Your sister is being held by the same monster who destroyed my pack. This is my war too, Chael. I have been fighting it for 7 years. I am just finally ready to stop surviving and start winning." He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. The Alpha King faded, replaced by the man she had been coming to know over 6 months of careful conversation. "When this is over, when Isolde is safe and Shadowmere is destroyed, there are things I need to tell you, things I have been waiting to say until the time was right." About the mate bond. His surprise was genuine. "You knew?" "I suspected. The way you look at me, the way your wolf responds when I am near. I have seen bonded pairs before. I recognize the signs." "And you stayed anyway, knowing what I might ask of you." "You have not asked anything. That is why I stayed." Alara reached out and touched his arm, the first time she had initiated physical contact. "When this is over, we will talk. But right now, we have a war to plan." Chael nodded, something like hope flickering in his eyes despite the darkness of the hour. "Then let us begin." The War Council convened at dawn. Alara had not slept. She had spent the entire night in Chael's private study, surrounded by parchment and charcoal, drawing maps from memory with hands that trembled only slightly. 7 years of walking the tunnels and passages of Shadowmere's compound had burned the layout into her mind, and now that knowledge poured onto paper like water finding its natural course. The main compound, the silver mines, the guard barracks, the punishment cells, the commander's quarters, the armory where silver weapons were forged and stored, the drainage system that carried waste and runoff from the mines into the river below. Every detail she could remember, every observation she had made during years of forced invisibility, every whispered rumor she had overheard while pretending to be too broken to pay attention. All of it translated into lines and annotations that would guide warriors into the heart of enemy territory. When the council members arrived, they found their king standing before a wall covered in Alara's work. Brennan was already there, his scarred face intent as he studied the layouts. Raven stood by the door, her sharp eyes assessing each person who entered. And Alara herself sat in a chair near the window, exhausted but unwilling to leave. "This is everything I remember," she said when Kale gestured for her to speak. "The compound has 3 main defensive rings. The outer wall is patrolled constantly, with guard towers at every corner and 2 at the main gate. The inner courtyard contains the barracks, the forge, and the commander's residence. The mines extend beneath everything, a maze of tunnels that even the guards do not fully understand." She stood and approached the maps, pointing to specific locations. "The prisoner cells are here, in the basement of the commander's residence. That is most likely where they are holding Isolde. The cells are designed for high-value captives, with silver-reinforced doors and a permanent guard rotation." "How do we get to them?" Brennan asked, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. "The front approach is suicide. The courtyard is a kill zone, designed to channel attackers into overlapping fields of fire. Any force that tries to breach the main gate will be cut down before they reach the inner buildings." "Then we need another way in." Alara moved her finger to a different part of the map. "The drainage system. It carries runoff from the mines into the river about half a mile from the compound. The tunnel is narrow and foul, but it connects directly to the lower levels of the mining complex. From there, a small team could navigate through the abandoned sections and emerge inside the inner courtyard." Kael studied the route she had indicated. "You know these tunnels." "I walked them for 7 years. I know every turn, every collapse, every section that is stable, and every section that could kill you if you breathe too hard." "Could you guide a team through?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alara met Kael's eyes and saw what he was really asking. Not just whether she could navigate the tunnels, but whether she was willing to return to the place that had stolen 7 years of her life, to face the horrors she had only recently escaped, to confront the brother who might try to kill her. "Yes, I can guide them." Brennan nodded slowly. "A 2-pronged attack. The main force hits the outer wall, draws the defender's attention, creates chaos. Meanwhile, a smaller team infiltrates through the drainage system, reaches the prisoner's cells, and extracts Isolde. Once she is safe, they signal the main force to begin the real assault." "The infiltration team will need to move fast," Raven added. "Once the fighting starts, the defenders will lock down everything. If we are not already inside by then, we never will be." "How many for the infiltration team?" Kale asked. "Small enough to move quietly, large enough to fight through any resistance they encounter." Brennan considered the maps. 12 warriors, plus Alara as guide. "I am coming with the infiltration team." Every head in the room turned toward Kale. "My king, that is inadvisable." Brennan's voice was carefully neutral. "Your place is with the main force. If something happens to you during the infiltration, the entire assault loses its commander. My sister is in those cells. I will not ask others to risk their lives for her while I wait safely behind the lines." "With respect, that is exactly what a king should do. Your life is not your own. It belongs to the pack." Kael's jaw tightened, but he did not immediately argue. Alara could see the conflict in his face, the tension between personal loyalty and royal responsibility. She understood that conflict better than anyone. She had felt it herself when choosing between running with Kael and staying to warn her friends. "Brennan is right," she said quietly, drawing surprised looks from the council. "You need to lead the main assault. Your presence will inspire the warriors, coordinate the attack, maintain pressure on the defenders. The infiltration team needs to be invisible. A king is never invisible." Kael looked at her, something flickering in his ice-blue eyes. "You are asking me to trust my sister's life to others. I am asking you to trust me. I will bring her back. I swear it on my parents' memory." The room was silent as Kael weighed her words. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. "Brennan commands the infiltration team. Elara guides. Raven, you are with the main force. We attack in 3 days at midnight." The planning consumed every waking hour. Elara worked with Brennan to select the 12 warriors who would comprise the infiltration team. They needed wolves who could move silently, fight efficiently, and follow orders without hesitation. Warriors who would not panic in confined spaces or lose their nerve when surrounded by enemy territory. The drainage tunnel was as foul as Elara remembered, perhaps worse after years without maintenance. The team would need to move through chest-deep water fouled with mining runoff, a toxic mixture that would burn exposed skin and potentially poison anyone who swallowed it accidentally. She specified the protective gear they would need, the herbal treatments that would minimize silver exposure, the signals they would use when verbal communication became impossible. She also prepared herself for what waited at the other end. Damon, the silver ghost. Her brother, who was no longer her brother, transformed by 7 years of brutality into a weapon designed to kill without hesitation. Helena's description had been clear. He was deadly, efficient, and showed no signs of the gentle boy Elara remembered. But she could not stop hoping, could not stop believing that somewhere beneath the assassin's mask, her brother still existed. The scar on his wrist proved he was physically the same person. Perhaps some part of him emotionally remained as well. She practiced what she would say when she saw him. Rehearsed the memories she would invoke, the details only family would know. She prepared herself for rejection, for violence, for the possibility that she would have to watch someone else kill her brother to complete the mission. She did not prepare herself for what actually happened. The night of the assault was clear and cold. Stars blazed overhead as the main force moved into position around Shadowmere's outer wall. 200 warriors in Frostholm colors, armed with silver weapons and burning with righteous fury. Their king rode at their head, mounted on a massive gray warhorse, his platinum hair gleaming in the moonlight like a banner. A mile away, the infiltration team slipped into the drainage tunnel. The water was exactly as terrible as Elara had warned. Cold sludge reached to their chests, carrying the stench of decay and the toxic bite of dissolved silver ore. The warriors moved in single file, their progress illuminated by hooded lanterns that cast just enough light to navigate without advertising their presence. Elara led the way, her hands trailing along the tunnel walls, her mind calling up memories she had tried for 7 years to forget. Every step brought her deeper into the nightmare she had escaped. Every breath reminded her of the years she had spent underground, dreaming of sunlight she thought she would never see again. But this time was different. This time she was not a prisoner. This time she had warriors at her back and a purpose in her heart. This time she was coming to Shadowmere not as a victim, but as a liberator. They moved for nearly an hour through the drainage system, the sounds of distant activity growing louder as they approached the compound. Finally, Elara spotted the junction she had been looking for, a side passage that led up into the abandoned mining section where she had first found Kael. "This way," she whispered, pulling herself out of the water and into the passage. "Quietly. We are inside the perimeter now." The abandoned section was exactly as she remembered. Cracked walls, sagging ceilings, the smell of decay and forgotten death. She led the team through the maze of tunnels, navigating by memory and instinct, her heart pounding louder with each step. They emerged into the compound's basement level just as the first sounds of battle erupted outside. Kael had begun his assault. The defenders reacted immediately, scrambling toward the outer wall, shouting orders and grabbing weapons. The chaos was exactly what the infiltration team needed. While attention focused on the attack, 12 wolves and 1 former slave moved through the shadows toward the prisoner cells. The guard station outside the cells was manned by only 2 warriors, the rest having rushed to join the defense. Brennan's team took them down silently, knives flashing in the torchlight, bodies lowered to the ground without a sound. Isolde was in the third cell, chained to the wall with silver shackles but otherwise unharmed. Her eyes went wide when she recognized Brennan, then wider still when she saw Alara. "You came for me." "We came for you," Alara confirmed, already working on the shackles. Her silver resistance made her the obvious choice for this task, and she had the locks open in moments. "Varen is with Theron in the command center," Isolde said, as Brennan helped her to her feet. "They are coordinating the defense. Serafina is there too, but she has been arguing with her father constantly. I do not think she fully supports what he has done." "Useful information." Brennan signaled for the team to move. "We need to get you out and send the signal before the defenders regroup." They were halfway to the extraction point when the silver ghost found them. He appeared from the shadows like his name suggested, a pale figure with white hair and gray-blue eyes, moving with a liquid grace that spoke of years of training. Twin daggers gleamed in his hands, their edges coated with silver that would make every cut potentially lethal. The infiltration team reacted instantly, weapons rising, bodies shifting into combat stances. But Alara stepped forward, placing herself between the assassin and her companions. "Wait." The word froze everyone in place. The silver ghost studied her with eyes that showed no recognition, no emotion, nothing but cold calculation. He was 15 years old, but there was nothing childlike about him. 7 years of brutality had stripped away every trace of the gentle boy she remembered, leaving behind this deadly weapon in human form. "You are the one who freed the Frostholm King." His voice was flat and without inflection. Commander Theron was very upset about that. "Damon." Something flickered in his eyes at the name. Just a brief flash, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "That is not my name. It is the name our mother gave you, the name she whispered in your ear every night when she sang you to sleep. Do you remember the song? About the moon and the stars and the wolves who danced beneath them?" The daggers did not waver, but the assassin did not attack. "You are trying to manipulate me. It will not work. I have no family. I have no past. I have only my duty to Shadowmere. You have a scar on your left wrist, shaped like a small fish. You got it when you were 5 years old, when you were learning to fish with our father, and the hook slipped. You cried for an hour, not because it hurt, but because you thought the fish would be angry at you for bleeding in their river." Silence stretched between them. The distant sounds of battle seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of frozen time. "I told you it would heal into an interesting shape," Alara continued, her voice gentle despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And you insisted that it looked like a fish. You were so proud of it. You showed everyone in the pack, telling them it was your special mark." The daggers trembled almost imperceptibly. "Stop talking." "The night before Shadowmere came, you had a nightmare. You came to my bed and asked if you could sleep with me because you were scared. I said yes, and you fell asleep holding my hand. When I woke up in the morning, you were still holding on. I said stop. That was the last peaceful night we ever had. The next day they came. They killed our parents. They burned our home. They took you one direction and me another, and I have spent 7 years believing you were dead." Tears were streaming down Alara's face now, but she did not wipe them away. She let him see her grief, her hope, her desperate love for the brother she had lost. "They told me you died of lung sickness 6 months after we were captured. I mourned you, Damon. I grieved for you every single day for 7 years, and now I find out you were alive this whole time, and they turned you into this." The assassin's composure cracked. I do not remember." "Yes, you do. You remember the fishing trip. You remember the scar. You remember somewhere deep inside, where they could not reach, where the real you is still hiding. They will kill me if I fail this mission. They will try to kill you anyway once they lose this war. Shadowmere is falling tonight, Damon. The only question is which side you will be on when the sun rises." Behind her, Brennan shifted impatiently. The sounds of battle were growing louder, closer. Their window for escape was narrowing with every passing second. The silver ghost looked at his sister with eyes that were no longer entirely empty. Something human had awakened behind the assassin's mask, something that remembered lullabies and fishing trips, and a big sister who had always made the monsters go away. "I have done terrible things. I know. Things that can never be forgiven. That is not for me to decide. But you can stop. Right now. You can choose to stop." The daggers lowered slowly. The assassin who had been the silver ghost closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was pain there, real human pain that spoke of memories too horrible to face, and a conscience that had never truly died. "I remember the song," he whispered, "about the moon and the stars. I used to sing it to myself in the dark after they finished training me for the day. I never understood why it made me feel safe." Alara crossed the distance between them and pulled her brother into her arms. He was taller than her now, 15 years old and trained as a killer, but in that moment, he was also the 8-year-old boy who had cried over a fishhook and needed his big sister to make the nightmares go away. His body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest, 7 years of suppressed humanity finally breaking free. "We need to move." Brennan's voice was urgent, but not unkind. "Whatever is happening here, it needs to happen somewhere safer." Alara pulled back, keeping one hand on Damon's arm. "Come with us, please." Damon wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so achingly familiar that it made Alara's heart clench. "I know another way out, faster than the route you came in. I can guide you." "Psst. Can we trust him?" one of the warriors asked, suspicion clear in his voice. "I can," Alara said firmly, "and that will have to be enough." Damon led them through passages that Alara had never known existed, service corridors and hidden ways that only Theron's inner circle would have access to. They moved quickly, the sounds of battle growing louder as they approached the surface level. They emerged into the inner courtyard just as the main gate fell. Kael's forces poured through the breach, a wave of silver and blue crashing against the desperate defenders. The Shadowmere warriors fought with the ferocity of wolves who knew they were cornered, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The battle was turning decisively in Frostholm's favor. "Get Isolde to safety," Brennan ordered, pointing toward the extraction route. "The rest of us join the main force." They were halfway across the courtyard when Lord Varen appeared. The former general looked nothing like the dignified elder who had stood before Frostholm's council. His formal robes were torn and bloodied, his gray hair wild, his eyes burning with the madness of a man who had watched his grand plans crumble to dust. Behind him stood Seraphina, her face pale and uncertain. "You!" Varen's voice was a snarl as he focused on Alara. "You ruined everything. You were supposed to be a nameless slave, a nobody, nothing that mattered. Instead, you freed the king. You exposed me. You destroyed everything I built. You destroyed yourself the moment you betrayed your pack." "I was trying to save my pack." Spittle flew from Varen's lips. Kael was too weak to do what needed to be done. Too soft, too hesitant. "I would have made Frostholm great again. I would have crushed Shadowmere years ago if they had listened to me instead of that coward." "Father," Seraphina's voice was quiet but firm, "it is over. We need to surrender before more people die." "Surrender? After everything I sacrificed? After everything I risked?" Varen's laugh was edged with hysteria. "No. If I cannot have victory, I will at least have vengeance." He moved faster than a man his age should have been able to move, decades of warrior training overcoming his body's deterioration. His blade, drawn from a hidden sheath, aimed directly at Alara's heart. But Damon was faster. The boy who had been the silver ghost threw himself into the blade's path, taking the strike that was meant for his sister. The sword pierced his shoulder and drove deep, a wound that would have been immediately fatal if it had hit its intended target. Damon's momentum carried him into Varen, and his own blade, still clutched in his hand, found the old general's chest. They fell together, a tangle of limbs and blood, and when they hit the ground, only one of them was still moving. Varen was dead, Damon was dying. Alara dropped to her knees beside her brother, her hands pressing desperately against the wound that was pumping his life out onto the cold stone. The blade had gone deep, had severed something vital, had done damage that not even supernatural healing could repair. No. No, no, no. Not after I just found you. Not now. Damon's gray-blue eyes, so like her own, found her face. Blood bubbled at the corner of his lips when he tried to speak. Sister, I remember now. I remember everything. Stay with me. We have healers. They can fix this. Just hold on. They cannot fix this. His hand found hers, gripping weakly. I knew when I moved. I knew it would kill me. I chose it anyway. Why? The word was a sob. Because you came back for me. After everything I did, after everything I became, you still came back. You still saw me as your brother. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. This is my choice. The first real choice I have made in 7 years. Let me have it. Alara could not speak, could not breathe, could only hold her brother's hand as the light in his eyes began to fade. The song, Damon whispered, about the moon and the stars. Will you sing it for me, like Mother used to? She did not know if she could. Her throat was so tight with grief that she could barely swallow, but she tried, forcing the words out in a voice that cracked and wavered, the lullaby their mother had sung to them both in the years before everything fell apart. Sleep now, little wolf, beneath the moon so bright. The stars will guard your dreams until the morning light. Damon's eyes closed. I am sorry, Alara, for everything. I remember now. I remember who I was supposed to be. His grip on her hand loosened. Tell them I chose to be your brother, in the end. Tell them I chose. And then he was gone. Alara did not scream, did not rage, did not do any of the things she might have expected of herself in this moment. She simply sat there, holding her brother's body, as the battle raged around her and the world continued spinning without regard for her shattered heart. Serafina approached slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no harm. I did not know he would do that. My father. I did not know he meant to kill you. Alara looked up at the woman who might have been her enemy, who had been party to her brother's captivity, who had watched and said nothing as a child was transformed into a weapon. What did you know? I knew he was wrong. I knew his plan would lead to disaster. But he was my father. I did not know how to stand against him until it was too late. Serafina's voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am only telling you the truth. The truth is that my brother is dead. Yes, and for what it is worth, I am sorry. He deserved better than what we made him. The battle ended with the sunrise. Commander Theron fell to Kale in single combat, the Alpha King's rage channeled into a fight that lasted less than 5 minutes but would be spoken of for generations. Theron had been powerful, cunning, and utterly ruthless, but he faced an opponent who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. When Kale stood over his enemy's body, his white fur stained red with blood, the remaining Shadowmere forces surrendered. The war was over. The aftermath was a blur of activity that Alara observed from a distance, her mind still processing a grief too large to fully comprehend. 47 slaves were freed from the mines, including Helena and young Theo, and the bonded pair Lyra and Cormac. Medical teams worked through the night treating the wounded from both sides. The dead were counted, identified, and prepared for proper burial according to the traditions of their respective packs. Damon was buried in the palace gardens of Frostholm, in a corner where the morning sun would warm his grave and wildflowers would bloom in spring. Alara insisted on it, and Kael made it happen without question. Serafina was exiled rather than executed, sent to a small pack on the far borders where she would live out her days in obscurity. Some called for her death, but Alara spoke against it. There had been enough killing, enough vengeance, enough blood to satisfy even the most demanding ghosts. Ronan, the guard captain who had helped Varen escape, had died during the battle. But before he fell, he had opened the gates from within, allowing Frostholm's forces to breach the compound faster than the defenders had anticipated. His body was found near the mechanism, a Shadowmere blade in his back, evidence of the choice he had made in his final moments. "He said he followed Varen because the old man once saved his father's life," Brennan reported. "But when it came to it, when he saw what Varen was willing to do to innocent people, he could not continue. He died trying to make things right." "Then bury him with honor," Kael ordered. Whatever his mistakes, his final act was one of courage. The days that followed were filled with the practical work of rebuilding. Treaties needed to be renegotiated. Borders needed to be redrawn. The freed slaves needed homes and occupations, and the slow, patient work of healing from years of trauma. Alara threw herself into this work with a dedication that concerned those who cared about her. She slept little, ate less, and spent every waking hour organizing relief efforts and counseling survivors. It was avoidance, of course, a way of running from the grief that waited for her in every quiet moment. Kael gave her space at first, understanding that some wounds needed to bleed before they could heal. But after 2 weeks, he came to find her in the refugee settlement she had established on the palace grounds. "You are going to work yourself to death. There is too much to do. There will always be too much to do. That is the nature of leadership." He sat down beside her on the bench where she had been reviewing supply lists. "But you cannot help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion." "I am fine." "You are not fine. You watched your brother die in your arms. You are the furthest thing from fine." Alara's hands stilled on the papers she had been studying. "If I stop moving, I have to feel it. And I do not know if I can survive feeling it." "You can. You will." Kael took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. "I know something about carrying grief so heavy, it feels like it will crush you. I carried the deaths of 200 warriors for 5 years. I let that weight drive every decision I made, every hesitation, every moment of doubt. It nearly destroyed me." "How did you survive it?" "I learned to share the burden. I let Brennan and Isolde and others help me carry what I could not carry alone." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Let me help you carry this, please." Alara felt something crack inside her, a dam that had been holding back a flood of emotions she had refused to acknowledge. The tears came then, and this time she did not try to stop them. She wept for Damon, for the brother she had lost twice, for the gentle boy who had been transformed into a weapon and then redeemed himself only in death. She wept for her parents, dead for 7 years, whose memory she had suppressed in order to survive. She wept for herself, for the girl she had been before Shadowmere came, for the innocence she would never reclaim. And through it all, Kael held her. He did not speak, did not offer empty comfort or hollow promises. He simply held her while she fell apart, his presence an anchor in the storm of her grief, his warmth a reminder that she was not alone. When the worst had passed, when she could breathe again without sobbing, she looked up at him with eyes that were raw but clearer than they had been in weeks. "You wanted to tell me something, before the war, about the mate bond. It can wait?" "No, I need something good to hold on to, something that is not just grief and loss and work. Tell me." Kael was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My wolf recognized you the moment you entered that chamber in the mines. He knew, even when I was too weak to think clearly, that you were meant to be mine. That is the nature of true mate bonds. They are instantaneous, undeniable, permanent. And you? I knew when I woke up and found you cutting through the chains, when I saw this woman risking everything to save a stranger, when I looked into your eyes and saw strength that matched my own." His hand came up to cup her face gently. "I fell in love with you before I even knew your name." Love. Yes, not just the bond, not just the wolf's recognition. Love. the kind that comes from watching you work with the healers, seeing how you treat everyone with the same respect regardless of their rank, the kind that comes from listening to you challenge me when I am wrong, from seeing you refuse to back down when you believe in something, the kind that comes from 6 months of learning who you are and wanting more. Alara leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the comfort she had been denying herself. I spent 7 years as property. I swore I would never belong to anyone again. You would not belong to me. You would belong with me. There is a difference. I know. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against her cheek. I think I have known for a while. I was just too scared to admit it. And now? Now I am still scared. But I'm also tired of letting fear make my decisions. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. Ask me, Kale, properly this time. Alara of Silverbrook, will you accept the mate bond? Will you be my partner, my Luna, my equal in all things? Will you choose me the way I have chosen you? Yes. The word was simple, absolute, final. Kale kissed her then, soft and tender and full of promise. It was not the desperate kiss of battlefield passion or the claiming kiss of an alpha asserting dominance. It was a beginning kiss, the first chapter of a story they would write together. When they finally separated, there were tears in his eyes that matched her own. I love you, he said. I will spend the rest of my life proving it. I know you will, and I will spend the rest of mine letting you. 6 months later, the mating ceremony was held beneath the full moon. The entire pack gathered in the great meadow outside the palace, hundreds of wolves in both human and animal form, witnessing the formal bonding of their king and their new Luna. Torches blazed in a great circle around the ceremonial space, their light mixing with the silver glow of the moon to create an atmosphere of ancient magic and sacred promise. Alara wore a dress of pure white, simple in its elegance. She had asked for something that represented who she was, rather than who others expected her to be. The fabric flowed like water when she moved, catching the light in ways that made her seem to glow from within. Kael waited at the center of the circle, dressed in the formal colors of Frostholm, his platinum hair bound back from his face by a silver circlet that marked him as king. His eyes never left her as she walked toward him. The ceremony itself was ancient and formal, words spoken in the old language that most modern wolves no longer fully understood. But the meaning was clear. They were pledging themselves to each other, binding their souls together, choosing to face whatever came as partners. When the time came for the marking, Kael went first. His teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, piercing the skin in the ritual bite that would leave a permanent scar. The pain was sharp but brief, overwhelmed almost immediately by a sensation of completion. The mate bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. She could feel him in her mind, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own. Love, joy, relief, and beneath it all, a bedrock of commitment that went deeper than words could express. Then it was her turn. Her teeth found the same spot on his neck, and through the bond she felt his pleasure, his satisfaction, his absolute certainty that this was right. The pack howled their approval, voices rising in a chorus that echoed off the mountains. Helena found her during the celebration, the old Omega's weathered face creased with a smile. Your mother would be so proud. I wish they could have been here. They are. Helena placed a hand over Alara's heart. They are right here, child. They always have been. Later that night, when the celebration had quieted, Alara walked through the palace gardens to Damon's grave. The summer flowers were in full bloom around the simple stone marker. Kael walked beside her, his hand warm in hers. I told them about you today, she said softly, kneeling beside her brother's resting place. About how you chose to be yourself in the end. How you saved my life. The breeze rustled through the flowers. I miss you, every day, but I like to think you would be proud of what we are building here. Kael knelt beside her, his presence steady and comforting through the bond. In the months that followed, Elara established a formal program for rehabilitating former slaves. She worked with Sage in the Healing Lodge. She sat in council meetings and offered perspectives the born aristocrats had never considered. And always, she brought the broken wolves to Damon's grave when they were ready. The past does not have to be a chain, she would tell them. It can be a lesson. Every day you wake up, you get to choose who you will be. One afternoon, standing before a group of newly arrived refugees, she told them her story. I was property for 7 years. I believed I would die in those mines, forgotten and unmourned. Then one night, I found a dying wolf in an abandoned tunnel. I could have walked away. Helping him meant risking everything. She smiled at the memory. I helped him anyway, not because I expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. She gestured toward the window, where Kael could be seen in the courtyard below. The mate bond is not a chain. It is a connection, a partnership, a choice you make every single day. The right partner does not take your freedom. They stand beside you and help you protect it. An old man raised his hand, tears in his eyes. How do we start over, after everything? One day at a time, one choice at a time. Elara's voice was soft, but certain. I cannot promise the memories will fade, but I can promise you are not alone. None of us are alone anymore. That evening, she stood at the window of the chambers she now shared with Kael, watching the sun set over the mountains. He came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. She leaned back into his warmth. How strange it is that the worst night of my life led me here. Not strange, right. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Everything that happened, all the pain and loss and fear, it brought you to me, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure it was worth it. Elara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had gone from dying stranger to mate, from rescued king to partner in all things. It already is. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed Elara's enslavement and her liberation, Damon's fall and his redemption, Kael's defeat and his victory. The same stars that would watch over the future they would build together. She was no longer a slave, no longer property, no longer alone. She was Luna of the Frostholm Pack, mate to an alpha king who loved her, and finally, irrevocably free.